I woke up to the sound of a tractor coughing itself to death again. That was the third time this week, and each time I filled the tank, swore I did, yet somehow it drained faster than a toddler with a juice box. At first, I thought I was losing it. 67 isn't ancient, but after burying my wife last winter, the grief had been fogging my brain like a dirty windshield. Still, no amount of grief explains why a full barrel of diesel vanished overnight. I blamed myself until the night my scarecrow blinked. Yeah, blinked. And what that hidden camera captured didn't just confirm my suspicions, it flipped my entire world upside down. It started small, so small I ignored it at first. I'd head out to the barn, ready to mow the east field, only to find my tractor bone dry. I even accused my nephew, Ricky, who comes by now and then to help around the place, though he's more of a Snapchat zombie than a farmhand. He swore he didn't touch the fuel, and even offered to buy me a padlock. That got me wondering if I was becoming one of those old men who yells at clouds. I let it go until the pattern formed. It wasn't just the diesel. A few tools were misplaced, hoses slightly twisted, small signs someone had been there when I wasn't looking. Still, no footprints, no tire tracks, no broken locks. That was until it rained. Sweet muddy justice. I stepped out the next morning and found one lone tire track, thin as a cartwheel, leading from the main road right up to the side of my shed. And I recognized it instantly. See, I may be getting up there, but I never forget a vehicle, especially one as ridiculous as Karen's hot pink HOA golf cart with the neon flags and hand-painted Neighborhood Safety Patrol sign zip-tied to the roof. She patrolled like she was leading a paramilitary unit, waving her clipboard at squirrels and glaring at joggers as if they were suspicious. She's the kind of woman who calls the police when your chickens are too enthusiastic at dawn. Karen lived in the development just past my backlot. The HOA claimed jurisdiction over the gravel access road that borders my property, land that used to be part of my farm before some fancy developer sliced it off 20 years ago. Ever since, the HOA's been trying to wrap its bureaucratic tentacles around every square inch they can see. And Karen? She was their queen. The president, secretary, enforcer, and self-declared moral compass. She once fined a guy for aggressively festive wind chimes. A week after I noticed the tire track, Karen showed up on her golf cart while I was fixing the pasture fence. She didn't say hello. Just started scribbling notes on her clipboard, squinting like she could find code violations with her mind. When I asked what she was doing, she told me she'd received multiple complaints about unsecured flammable storage on my property. I looked over at my red fuel barrel, which had sat in that same spot, bolted down and locked, since 1998. I pointed that out. She told me rules evolve, and I should consider upgrading to safer standards, then zipped off like she'd just dropped some constitutional truth bomb. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. I'd laughed it off, sure, but her tone, her timing, the weird track by the shed, it all screamed setup. So I dusted off the old trail cams I used to use to catch coyotes. One got duct-taped inside a knothole in the barn wall. Another went under the deck, pointed right at the fuel station. The third? That went into my scarecrow. I popped the head off, hollowed it out, and gave him a camera eye. Creepy? Maybe. Effective? You bet. 4 days went by. No hit. Then, on the fifth night, 1:13 a.m., I got the alert. Movement at the fuel shed. I stumbled out of bed and opened the live feed on my tablet, expecting maybe a raccoon or a drunk teenager. But no. There she was. Karen. Dressed in all black like some suburban ninja, dragging 2 red gas cans behind her. She paused and looked around, then went straight for the barrel. Didn't even hesitate. Opened it, hooked up a siphon, and got to work like she'd done it 100 times. I watched in disbelief as she filled both cans, then paused to wipe sweat from her forehead with a perfectly monogrammed towel. Then, and this is the part that really got me, she looked right at the camera. Not the one in the scarecrow, thank God, but the one by the shed. Smirked. And said, "Bet old Joe won't even notice." These farmers never do. Then she laughed and drove off into the night. I sat there, staring at the screen like I'd just seen Bigfoot do karaoke. The anger came in waves. Not just because she was stealing. Not just because she was smug about it. But because she thought I was too stupid to catch on. That she'd made me the punchline of her private joke. I knew right then, I wasn't just going to report her. I was going to make sure she never forgot the night she stole from Joe McBride's farm. The next morning, I made coffee, sat on my porch, and watched her roll past in her golf cart like nothing happened. She even waved. I waved back and smiled. Because now, it wasn't just about fuel. It was about respect. And revenge. And I was just getting started. The next day, the sky was clear, the birds were chirping, and Karen was smug. She always had that look, like she knew something you didn't, and you were too stupid to realize it. I sat on my porch swing pretending to read the paper, coffee in hand, watching her buzz by in her ridiculous golf cart like a hornet with a clipboard. She didn't even glance my way this time, which made her next move even more obvious. Karen always got bold before she got sloppy. That night, I made sure all 3 trail cameras were fully charged and armed. I even repositioned the one inside the scarecrow's head just slightly to catch a wider view. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room with the screen glowing beside me. Midnight passed. Then 1. I was beginning to think maybe she'd skip this round. But right at 2:13 a.m., motion detected. There she was, creeping along the gravel path, the faint electric whine of her golf cart tires barely registering on the mic. She parked under the cover of the old sycamore like a seasoned criminal and tiptoed across my field like she expected to be dodging laser beams. Karen wore all black again, this time with a baseball cap and a hoodie that said, "Neighborhood Watch," across the back, which would have been hilarious if I wasn't so angry. She brought 3 gas cans this time and had a little LED lantern hooked to her belt. She moved with purpose, like she wasn't just stealing. She was executing a plan she believed in. She opened the fuel barrel, looked around, and started siphoning like a pro. And this time, she started humming. Actually humming. Some old show tune I couldn't place, like she was having the time of her life while draining my hard-earned diesel into her HOA patrol chariot. She finished, tightened the lid, and strolled off without even checking her surroundings. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2? Talking to herself loud enough for the camera mic to pick up. She muttered, "Guess that old coot still hasn't figured it out. Probably thinks the squirrels are getting into his gas." Then she laughed, loud and long, like she'd just pulled off the crime of the century. That laugh triggered something deep in me. Not just anger, but something old and tired and raw. Maybe it was the months of silence after my wife passed, the long days alone with no one to talk to but the goat. But hearing her treat me like I was invisible, that hit different. The next morning, I acted normal. Waved at neighbors. Fed the chickens. Fixed a loose plank on the back fence. But after lunch, I pulled the footage from the cameras and got to work. I edited the best clips together, added a timestamp, and even threw in some sarcastic subtitles. Karen's Greatest Hits Volume 1 played like a late-night infomercial. My favorite part was when she slipped slightly in the mud and whispered, "Not again," like this wasn't her first clumsy heist. I didn't send the video to the police. Not yet. That would have been too easy. I had a better plan. I uploaded it to the private Facebook group for our area, Willow Creek Residents, News and Neighborhood Watch. The kind of place where people argued about trash bin placement and posted blurry possum sightings. Perfect audience. I used a throwaway account and captioned it, "Who's fueling their HOA power trip on Joe's dime?" Then I hit post and walked away. It took about 30 minutes before the comments exploded. People tagged each other. Some laughed. Some were furious. Others shared their own weird Karen run-ins. Unfounded fines, trespassing, threats over decorative birdhouses. Turns out, I wasn't her only victim. One guy said she tried to report him for having an overly masculine lawnmower. Someone else claimed she fined their teenager for skateboarding too joyfully. The stories kept coming and the video kept spreading. But I didn't stop there. The next day, I called the HOA office and asked to speak to the board. I was told they didn't have time for individual complaints unless submitted through proper channels. Fine. I printed out screenshots of Karen mid-theft, slapped them into a folder, and mailed them directly to every board member with a simple note. Your officer. My fuel. Thoughts. Karen must have seen the video too, because the very next morning, she was parked outside my property, arms crossed, lips pursed like she'd swallowed a lemon and liked it. She waited until I walked out with the trash, then stormed up the driveway like she was leading a SWAT team. Joe, she barked, we need to talk. You've crossed a line. Karen, I said, keeping my voice calm, you crossed my property line. Repeatedly. With a gas can. She waved a piece of paper at me like it was a legal document. You're being fined. $2,000 for illegal fuel storage, unsafe agricultural practices, and malicious surveillance. I blinked. Malicious surveillance? You recorded me without consent, she snapped. On my property. While you were committing a crime, I said slowly, letting the words sink in. Her face turned red, then purple. You're not allowed to post private footage. That's defamation. Only if it isn't true, I said. And by the way, thanks for making it go viral. I've had 3 people offer to buy me lunch this week. She sputtered, turned on her heel, and stomped back to her cart. As she peeled off, one of her tires hit a hidden sprinkler head and sprayed her right in the face. She screamed, swerved, and nearly took out a mailbox before disappearing down the road. Later that afternoon, I found a new violation notice stuck to my mailbox. This one claimed my chickens were a noise hazard, and my porch furniture posed a threat to aesthetic harmony. It was clearly retaliation, but I didn't care. I was just getting warmed up. That evening, an envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "You're not alone. Check your email." At first, I thought it was a prank. Then I opened my inbox and found an anonymous message with attachments, financial records from the HOA, minutes from closed-door meetings, and a list of complaints filed against Karen by other members, all quietly dismissed. Turns out, Karen wasn't just stealing gas. She was using HOA funds for beautification patrols that somehow included spa days and catered lunches. And now I had someone on the inside feeding me everything. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I stepped onto my porch with a steaming mug of coffee and a satisfied smirk. The sky was doing that soft orange blush it gets right before it burns off into a hot day, and everything felt quiet in a good way. But that was just the calm before the storm. By 9 a.m., my phone was buzzing nonstop. Apparently, the video had made the rounds faster than I expected. Local Facebook moms were tagging their neighbors, the high schoolers were making remix edits of Karen's midnight fuel heist, and even the pastor had shared it on the church bulletin board with the note, "Thou shalt not steal." It had become a local sensation. By noon, a second wave hit. Karen's face was now a meme. Someone edited her siphoning gas with the caption, "When HOA dues just aren't enough," and another made a gif of her slipping in the mud with circus music playing in the background. My favorite was a screenshot of her holding the gas can with a laser pointer added to her eyes, titled "Karen, Queen of Combustion." I didn't post a single one of them, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't save them for personal enjoyment. But memes are one thing. Real consequences are another. That's when Karen decided to escalate. She couldn't take the humiliation, and like any true tyrant caught in the act, she turned the blame outward. That afternoon, a white animal control truck rolled into my driveway. The officer, a tired-looking woman in mirrored sunglasses, stepped out and looked around the yard. I came out to meet her halfway, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You Joe McBride?" she asked. "Depends who's asking," I said, though I already had a good guess. "Got a report of animal neglect. Chickens in distress. Rooster aggression. Excessive crowing. She read it off like it was her fourth nonsense call that day. I just blinked. You're kidding. She shook her head and sighed. Mind if I take a look? Be my guest, I said and led her to the coop. My chickens are treated better than most house pets. They've got a clean coop, fresh hay, constant access to food and water, and they even have a little shaded swing set I built for them last summer. I watched as the officer crouched near the fence and made the kind of cooing sounds normally reserved for babies and golden retrievers. One of my silkies waddled over and sat right beside her. Well, she said finally, these birds seem pretty emotionally stable to me. Thanks, I replied deadpan. They go to therapy every Thursday. She laughed and handed me a pink carbon copy of the report. I'll mark this as unsubstantiated. But between you and me, we get a lot of calls from that HOA. Mostly nonsense. I watched her drive off, more amused than mad, but I knew Karen wasn't done. She never backed down quietly. I had to get ahead of her next move. So I got to work. That night, I set up the next part of my plan. I went out and bought a few cheap gas cans, filled them with water dyed yellow, and lined them up beside a new fuel barrel I labeled Private Reserve, Do Not Touch. I placed them in plain sight near the back shed, made it look like I'd gotten lazy with hiding them. Then I installed a new motion sensor that triggered not just the cameras, but a fake security light and a subtle GPS tracker taped inside the handle of the most accessible can. If Karen came back for more, I'd know exactly where that fuel went. Meanwhile, I followed up with the anonymous email I'd received. The person replied quickly, saying they'd worked for the HOA for years, had watched Karen bend the rules and bully neighbors into silence, and were ready to bring her down, but needed help making it public. I told them I had just the plan. The next evening, I was sitting by my laptop, watching the cameras like some kind of farmyard James Bond, when motion set off the system. I leaned in. Sure enough, there she was again. Karen, in all her nighttime glory, wearing a hoodie this time with a face mask like she was about to knock over a liquor store. She moved fast, clearly nervous, but not nervous enough to skip the opportunity. She grabbed one of the decoy cans, tested the weight, and muttered, "Jackpot." Then she wheeled it back to her golf cart, not knowing she'd just handed me everything I needed. The GPS pings led me straight to her backyard shed the next morning. I didn't even have to do anything with that yet. Just knowing where she stored her stolen goods was enough. Instead, I focused on the next hit, sending the HOA board a full video compilation titled Karen After Dark, paired with a neatly written document from my anonymous friend outlining years of shady fund usage, misfiled violation reports, and misuse of HOA resources for personal errands. One entry showed Karen had authorized a payment for HOA patrol vehicle maintenance from the community budget. That vehicle was her ridiculous golf cart. That afternoon, I got a text from a neighbor, one I didn't even know well. You might want to stop by the HOA building. It's getting spicy. I didn't need much more than that. When I arrived, the room was buzzing. A few board members stood off to the side, flipping through the pages I'd sent. Others were watching the video on a projector someone had clearly rigged up in a hurry. Karen was there too, flushed red and gesturing wildly, trying to explain how everything was taken out of context. "This is slander," she cried. "It's edited. You can't trust this." One of the older board members, a retired judge named Helen, held up the GPS printout. "Karen, this report shows you driving a gas can from Joe's farm straight into your shed. That's not editing. That's data." Karen's eyes flicked around like a trapped possum. It was a misunderstanding. A safety inspection. "He's storing flammable material illegally." "Enough," Helen said. "We've tolerated your nonsense long enough. There will be a vote." Karen sputtered and tried to rally support, but it was over. One by one, the board members raised their hands. Unanimous. Karen was stripped of her position and ordered to return any HOA property in her possession. Someone clapped. Then someone else. Before long, the whole room was applauding, except for Karen, who stormed out muttering about defamation lawyers and conspiracies. I just stood there, leaning against the wall, watching it all unfold. No words. Just a small smile. Because I knew it still wasn't over. I had one more move left. And Karen, poor Karen, still had no idea what was in that last fuel can. The next morning was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of stillness that creeps in before something ridiculous happens. I fed the chickens, gave the goats a scratch behind the ears, and checked on my camera system. Everything was functioning perfectly. The fake fuel stash was untouched, at least, as far as appearances went. But I already knew Karen had taken the bait a couple nights earlier. That decoy gas can with the GPS tracker had pinged in her backyard shed. She thought she'd gotten away with one last haul before her downfall. But she didn't know what else I'd slipped into that can besides a tracking device. I had spent the last 2 days prepping what I like to call agricultural deterrents. A blend of glitter, bright blue dye powder, a few live crickets, and, for maximum effect, a scoop of very ripe chicken guts from a recent freezer clean-out. I'd sealed it in a spring-loaded compartment inside the fake can, set to pop if it was tipped too far or opened the wrong way. Not dangerous, just messy and deeply unpleasant. A farmer's version of booby-trapping the cookie jar. That morning, the tracker moved again. Karen must have finally tried to use the fuel. About an hour later, I heard a scream. A long, high-pitched, unbroken wail that echoed across the valley like a horror movie foghorn. I leaned against my fence post and waited. Sure enough, a few minutes later, her golf cart tore down the gravel road like a malfunctioning theme park ride, blue dye dripping from the roof, glitter sparkling in the sun, and what looked like shredded feathers and unidentifiable goo splattered across her windshield. Karen was behind the wheel, soaked, covered, and absolutely hysterical. She skidded to a stop in front of my place, jumped out, and started flailing her arms. "You maniac," she screeched. "You tried to poison me." I sipped my lemonade and didn't even blink. "Karen, I'd suggest you stop yelling before you get more crickets in your mouth." She stomped up the driveway, leaving a trail of glittery blue footprints on my gravel. The smell hit me a second later. Something between rotten meat and citrus air freshener, like a raccoon had exploded in a car wash. She was shaking with rage, dyed blue from the waist up, and covered in what I can only describe as farm-themed confetti. "This is assault," she spat. "Chemical warfare. I'm calling the sheriff. You stole fuel from my property," repeatedly. "That can was clearly marked private, and you accessed it without permission. You want to get the law involved, be my guest," I replied. "Just remember that I have video, GPS logs, and about half the county on my side." Karen's face twisted into something that probably should have stayed in a Halloween mask. She screamed again, stomped back to her golf cart, and peeled off, chunks of glittery chicken goo flying behind her like wedding confetti at a clown funeral. I figured that would be the end of it. But then, hours later, I got a call from the HOA. Or more specifically, from Helen, the retired judge who'd helped vote Karen out. She invited me to an emergency board meeting that evening. Word was, Karen had filed an official complaint and wanted to contest her removal. I didn't want to go, but something told me this was going to be worth seeing. When I arrived, the small room was already packed with homeowners, many of them clutching printouts of Karen memes, screenshots of the viral video, or just looking wildly entertained. Karen sat at the front table, cleaned up but still slightly blue around the ears. She'd swapped the hoodie for a blazer and wore an expression like she'd been wrongfully convicted of grand theft country club. "I move to rescind the vote taken against me," she said, standing with her hands clasped. It was based on edited footage, harassment, and orchestrated online attacks meant to destroy my reputation. Helen raised an eyebrow. "We all watched you siphoning fuel. Live, unedited, from multiple angles." Karen's voice cracked. "Those were not real gas cans. They were traps." "That's entrapment." Someone in the back snorted. Another person whispered, "Did she just confess again?" Karen pushed forward. "This man, Joe has been stalking me with cameras, making memes, and now he's planted chemicals designed to humiliate me. I want him fined. Sued. I want his farm declared hostile property." The room erupted in laughter. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Helen cleared her throat and held up a folder. "We've received additional documentation from a concerned party inside the HOA," she said. "It outlines misuse of HOA funds, falsified citations, and even fabricated animal control complaints. All traced back to you." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but Helen wasn't finished. "We also now have the receipts for golf cart maintenance, fuel reimbursements, and a decorative HOA patrol hat charged to the community fund, totaling nearly $7,000. Karen's face went white. "We've contacted the county auditor," Helen said, "and law enforcement has been made aware. We suggest you consult an attorney." Karen started crying. It wasn't the kind of crying that tugs at your heartstrings. It was theatrical, nose-running, red-faced sobbing, the kind a toddler does when their toy gets taken away. She tried to plead, made vague threats about lawyers and lawsuits, but nobody was listening. The meeting ended with Helen asking for volunteers to repaint the HOA signs Karen had installed, most of which featured her own name in gold vinyl. I drove home slow that night, window down, letting the breeze roll through. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. Not just because Karen had been ousted, not just because justice had been served, but because I'd remembered I wasn't alone. The community had rallied. Neighbors had stood up. And somehow, in the process of defending my property, I'd connected with people I thought had forgotten I existed. When I got back to the farm, the chickens were already roosting, the goats munching quietly, and the stars starting to pepper the sky. I walked past the scarecrow and gave him a tip of the hat. He'd done good work. So had I. And while Karen might still have one or two tricks left, she was running out of fuel in every sense of the word. But just in case, I started sketching out the next trap. Something involving a paint bomb, fake gold bars, and a mannequin dressed like a code enforcement officer. Because out here, when the fox keeps sneaking into the henhouse, you don't just lock the door. You give the fox a show he'll never forget. The days that followed felt almost surreal. The kind of quiet that settles over a place when the storm finally moves on, leaving everything a little cleaner, a little sharper, like the air has been cleared of all its grime. Karen was gone. Not just from her post, but from visibility altogether. Her golf cart, once a daily nuisance screeching down the gravel path like a mosquito with wheels, hadn't been seen since the day of the board meeting. Her house was shuttered up most days, curtains drawn, silence thick. It was like the queen of the HOA had been dethroned and stuffed into her own moat. I expected one last jab from her, some petty retaliation, a last hurrah of insults or empty threats. And she tried, of course. A few days after the board meeting, I received a letter by certified mail. Karen's name typed in blocky legalese at the top. It was a cease and desist, accusing me of harassment, public humiliation, tampering with her property, emotional distress, and something bizarre about intentional glitter trauma. I read it 3 times just to make sure it wasn't some elaborate prank. Then I set it gently in the coop for the chickens to enjoy as bedding. Fitting, really. But that wasn't the end of it. A week later, I received a court summons. Karen had officially filed a small claims suit against me for damages totaling just under $5,000. It included the cost of a ruined golf cart seat, emotional therapy, professional car detailing, and lost income from her HOA position. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my sandwich. Still, court's court, and even the dumbest lawsuit needs answering. I showed up in my best jeans and cleanest flannel, armed with a flash drive of every video, GPS log, and screenshot I had. The judge, an older fellow who looked like he'd rather be fishing, barely concealed his disdain once the footage started playing. Karen sat on the plaintiff's bench, all prim and tight-lipped, her story full of sobs and outrage. But the moment the video of her in full black hoodie, dragging gas cans across my property, filled the screen. The case began to unravel like cheap twine in a rainstorm. Her attorney, some poor soul probably hired online the night before, tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, that she believed the gas was community property, due to road access agreements. The judge leaned over, peered at the footage again, and asked, "Is there a HOA bylaw that permits unauthorized midnight siphoning from private barrels?" When the lawyer stammered, the judge waved it off like a fly. 15 minutes later, Karen's case was dismissed. That wasn't even the best part. The judge looked over his glasses and said, "Mr. McBride, I'd like to remind you that you are within your rights to counterclaim for damages." I smiled, as if the thought had only just occurred to me. Then I opened my folder and handed over documentation of all the fuel stolen, my time lost chasing false violations, and a few repair receipts for the fences she'd damaged sneaking onto my property. I even added a modest invoice for emotional damage caused by excessive clipboard proximity. Karen's face turned redder with every passing second. By the end of it, the court ordered her to pay me $1,800 in restitution and issued a warning that any future trespassing would result in criminal charges. The look on her face as she stormed out of that courtroom, clutching her little pleather purse like it was a grenade, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. After court, I went straight to the hardware store and bought myself a brand new fire pit. I figured justice like that deserved celebration. That weekend, I invited the neighborhood. Flyers went up all over the area, barbecue bash, in honor of HOA leadership changes. Bring a dish, bring a story. I half expected no one to show. But by sundown, my property was packed. Old neighbors I hadn't seen in years came by with potato salad, baked beans, smoked ribs, and coolers full of beer. Someone even brought a karaoke machine, which we wisely chose not to plug in. People sat around the fire, swapping their own Karen horror stories. Turns out she'd been a menace to just about everyone. One guy claimed she tried to ticket him for mowing after 5 p.m. because it disturbed the sunset. Another said she once put a violation notice in his toddler's tricycle basket for improper vehicle parking. By the end of the night, everyone was laughing, sharing contact info, and talking about forming a real neighborhood watch. One that actually watched out for each other, not watched people through binoculars for code infractions. As the fire crackled and the moon climbed high, I took a quiet walk out to the edge of the property. I passed the Scarecrow, still standing proud with his camera eye long since retired. I tipped my hat to him. He'd earned it. Then I wandered toward the back gate, where the fuel shed used to sit in constant paranoia. Now it was just another corner of a peaceful farm. I'd installed solar panels and moved the storage inside a locked barn. No more easy pickings. Before heading back, I paused, looked out over the fields, and felt something settle in my chest. Not pride, not victory, though those were there, sure, but something simpler. Peace. After a long year of grief, frustration, and isolation, I'd reconnected with my community in the most unexpected way. I didn't set out to be some local hero. I just wanted to keep my fuel from walking off. But maybe that's how it goes sometimes. You protect what's yours, and people start to realize they can too. Karen never showed her face again, at least not around here. Rumor was she moved 2 towns over, where she joined a new HOA and tried to ban wind chimes entirely. Some folks never learn. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Around here, the chickens still cluck, the goats still bleat, and the neighbors still laugh whenever someone mentions gasoline. I went back to my porch that night, cracked open a cold one, and watched the last of the barbecue crowd head down the gravel road, headlights fading into the dark. The Scarecrow stood tall behind me, watching over the quiet land. And as I rocked back on the creaky porch swing, I couldn't help but chuckle. Lesson of the day? Don't steal from farmers. Especially not the ones who know how to wire a camera into a cornstalk.